I think for health and safety professionals, that all that's going on in terms of looking at safety differently, using technology, there's just a lot of innovation in this space. And how do we use data to be more proactive and predictive? Some of that went out the window when we got to COVID because I found myself getting much more in the weeds, especially in the early days of that, because there was so much that we were trying to understand and put in place. I think that's one of the great things about our profession as health and safety professionals. We love to solve problems.
Welcome to the Canary Report, the podcast where risk leaders, safety professionals, and operational executives come for real-world stories and smarter strategies to keep people safe. I'm your host, Michael Zhao. In each episode, I sit down with exceptional leaders who are transforming how risk and safety are managed. Whether you're a leader of a nationwide EH&S program in a high-risk industry, or you champion workplace safety across 200 retail locations, this podcast is for you. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Canary Report. This is Michael Zhao, CEO of Yellowbird, and I am honored and privileged to have Heather MacDougall as one of my guests today, or as my guest today. And welcome, Heather. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
So before we kick it off, I think people should know at least who I'm chatting with today. I told somebody earlier I never get nervous doing these. I love these. It's friendships and relationships. And I was actually a little nervous preparing for today. And, she's very humble. Well, thank you. I mean, Heather's a very accomplished and remarkable human being. And I'm going to give you a little bit of her background, and we'll talk about some parts of the journey that she's been through. But let me kick in by just saying thank you for joining us. And this is what I know about you, and you can correct anything that you like along the way. But Heather is she's recognized by many, many people that I know and admire, as well as by the internet that knows everything, as a top expert in identifying and mitigating risk, driving continual improvement, and aligning businesses with safety objectives. And that's what she does now in her consulting practice and in her relationships. She's also a keynote speaker. Most recently, she presented at BCSP's Global Learning Summit. She's was the chief safety officer at Amazon, where she led over 9,000 people and safety professionals, over 1.6 million employees across 1,000 plus sites. That's got to be absolutely overwhelming. So very impressed by that. From 2019 to 2020, she directed over $1 billion in safety investment, including crisis leadership through COVID-19, navigating international laws, cross-cultural and cross-functional collaboration, legal, HR, ops, public policy. You have background in many, many of these, and among which you are the chair of the Occupational Safety and Health Review Commission, where you authored a landmark decision around heat and workplace violence, which is absolutely amazing. And you cut case backlogs by bring them down to historical lows, and you modernize the agency in many, many ways. And now you are acting as an impartial advisor. And it's funny because I had to look up the word amici curiae. I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing it correctly, but as an independent advisor, voluntary advisor in the court of law, which is what the lovely internet said, so it's got to be right, on OSHA's workforce worker walk-around final rule. And among other things, and then we will get into this, you and I are deeply embedded in the same community. I actually did a little bit of looking around. So we're actually in the mutual, because I've been here since Jesus was a baby. I've been around this industry forever. And ASSP, with 38,000 members and on their LinkedIn communities, BCSP with 28,000, NSC, the list goes on and on. You and I share more groups together than any other group and any other person I've ever been around. So, with that introduction, did I do okay? Did I actually give you the due that you absolutely deserve?
Oh, wow. More than I deserve. You definitely have done some research. So thank you for that.
I try. I don't want to insult anybody as we start talking. I think the best way to start off, if you'd be open to it, is just tell us about you and your upbringing, family, where you're from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, no, happy to. So I'm in South Florida now. This is where I live after splitting my time for about 10 years between DC and Seattle. But now I call Palm Beach County home. But I really started out as a labor and employment lawyer. So after I graduated law school, I joined a boutique labor and employment firm representing corporations. And eventually through that work, I began to specialize on workplace health and safety. But it was kind of a journey of somebody tapping me on the shoulder and asking me to go to the review commission, first as a chief counsel to the then chairman. I had been unsuccessfully vetted for a role on the National Labor Relations Board. And they said, would you go get some experience in the administration? And we'd love for you to take this role at the review commission. So that's how I had sort of a fork in the road. And I found that I really loved health and safety. I love the complexity of it. I love the challenge of it. And I love how there's this common goal of continually improving. And where I was in terms of this court that decided OSHA citations, I loved how there is a value in precedent. You don't see that, for example, the NLRB, where I had contemplated going. There's a lot of flip-flopping. And I feel like with the OSHRC precedent, while there is some change, it's really building oftentimes on how do we continually grow, recognizing the precedent of the past. And so I was drawn to health and safety as a lawyer. Eventually, I found my way back to the review commission, first as a commissioner under President Obama. And then when President Trump was elected, I was renominated as the chair. And at some point while I was there, I got a call from Amazon about a role that they were creating. And eventually I found my way there too. So now I'm back into kind of a mix of all of the experiences I've held throughout my career. I'm both a lawyer and also lean into that chief safety officer experience to really help other companies on their journey of continual improvement. And it's just a very exciting time, I think, for health and safety professionals, that all that's going on in terms of looking at safety differently, using technology. There's just a lot of innovation in this space. And how do we use data to be more proactive and predictive?
Thank you. That was it's like you've done this before. You've told this journey before, I suspect.
And in my family, I have 2 daughters. I should also mention my wonderful children. And they are now adults. So I'm an empty nester, but very proud of them as well.
Hard to believe. And you said so are they in college, out of college? Where are they in their journey, or not going that route? Doesn't matter to me, but they're not in your home. So where are they?
Yeah. Well, one graduated from the University of Virginia 2 years ago, and now she's in New York, like many young people these days. And my other is home for the summer, but she will be a senior in college at Smith College in Massachusetts. Fantastic.
Well, congratulations having 2 highly educated and sounds like special young ladies. I have a son who is in college as well, and I've got 2 juniors, one college, one high school. So I'm preparing for the empty nesting stage. We're not quite there. I just started a little driver, so she passed her driver's license test last week. So still not
I'm sure
quite
she's
there.
very excited.
She absolutely is. So one of the things I want to talk to you about, because I actually had to look this up and find out a little bit about it, is so there's an OSHA. You were actually in opposition to this policy around, or this, I don't want to misspeak as far as what the walk around policy is, but can you tell me your philosophy, your reason around the designation of the walk around, third party inspector rules? I want to just understand where you were coming from on that. Just because for me, I don't really understand a lot of it. I want to look at it through your lens, and I'm not going to argue. I just want to really get where you were coming from on that particular policy. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
I probably didn't even speak about. I didn't even reference it correctly, let alone give any articulate description. But I think you know what I'm saying.
That's what it's been called, the walk around rule. And during the Biden administration, they came out with a new regulation that they characterized as a clarification of an existing regulation. And I guess I would start with sort of the legal analysis of it, that I'm not sure that that's accurate. I think it was more than a clarification. It involved some flip-flopping in various administrations, but it previously it started with a letter of interpretation and ultimately culminated in this new regulation, or a clarification of the regulation. So I'm not sure that it went through the right process in terms of our rulemaking process, because I don't think it was merely a clarification. I think it's more substantive than that. And in light of that, I'm not sure that it correctly interprets the OSHA Act, which is Section 8E of the OSHA Act. So that's one basis for the challenge, the legal challenge to the walk-around rule, is that it was improperly promulgated under the APA, the Administrative Procedure Act, and the process that's required there. In terms of a policy standpoint, I think that OSHA characterized it as not that broad of a right and not that big of a change, but I also disagree with that. I think that it takes away constitutional rights of employers to exclude representatives, external third parties from their property. And OSHA sort of took a backdoor way to say that this is no different than essentially a union representative. But that's, again, I don't think correct, in the sense that there's a process under the National Labor Relations Act for certifying a collective bargaining representative. And this does not go through that process at all. It really opens the door to a very broad range of third parties that could be involved in the walk-around portion of an inspection. And so that could be union organizers, but it's not even limited to that. It could be plaintiffs' attorneys. It could be essentially anyone who wants to represent one employee or more employees, and without any ability to determine that that representative truly does represent the employees of the workplace. So it's got a variety of challenges to it. It's now pending in a district court in Texas. And I think there was a Supreme Court case that came out last summer that overrules what's called Chevron deference. And I think under those new principles, my guess is that the challenge to the walk-around rule will be upheld. So the new regulation will be invalidated. But that remains to be seen. It's been pending for quite some time, and we haven't had come out of the court.
It's so interesting to hear your interpretation, and specifically the circumstances that I had not even considered, which is a lot. And when I first read the Cliff Notes version, and I will admit that I have not read the statute, and I certainly have not read enough detail to be even close to an expert on this. But when I read it, I thought it was actually going to be bad for our business, because we actually represent a lot of small businesses and large businesses. We've been informed of an inspection, we've been informed of a walkthrough or something, and my superintendent does not have the ability to represent us in a way that I feel comfortable. I want to have the Yellowbird professional come out. And that, for me, made a lot of sense in that use case. But you now talk about other third parties that are representing employees, that are representing unions, that are representing other folks. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, now I get it. Like, because, simpleton math, I'm sitting here saying, why would that not be something, you having somebody who understands the laws and regulations and compliance? Why wouldn't you want somebody there? But it goes a lot deeper than that. And it makes a lot more sense now that you've explained it to me, which is why I asked, because I'm like, okay, this is why I was asking this question, because at face value, like most things you read on the internet, it seems like a no-brainer. And now I kind of understand the application. So going back to your journey.
I would say that I think employers were concerned when this new regulation came out that it was really going to be a floodgate that would open. And from my conversations with folks in OSHA, it hasn't been used that much. So I think that's one thing to consider, especially if the court says that this regulation is valid. OSHA, I think some employers are asking OSHA to do additional rulemaking to pull back this regulation. I would question whether it should go through that process, because it's challenging to promulgate a regulation or even to repeal a regulation, because the same process has to take place. So if it's found to be valid, I'm not sure others would disagree in the employer community about whether it's worth those resources, because I don't think that it's been this huge watershed moment that some fear.
It's interesting because I am of the age, and I mentioned that I was born with a disability, and so I'm pretty active in the disability community. And when ADA came out with all their, structural guidelines around accessibility and things like that in the 90s, and it was in the mid to early 90s, late 80s. I don't know exactly when it was, but I remember that there was a whole, panic about the number of people. And let's not get it wrong, because there's still a number of, I would say, less than scrupulous people taking advantage of people leveraging the ADA laws and rules. But everybody was so concerned that we will never be able to maintain a business and keep an ADA compliant operation. And that just turned out not to be true. And so many of I always think back to that and think, people don't always, yes, worst case scenario. There's a lot of worst case scenarios that don't ever come even remotely true to reality. And it's used as a reason not to or to do something. And most of the time, it's somewhere in the middle, like most things in life.
Yeah, that's a good reminder.
So thank you for doing that and for reminding us. So in your journey with Amazon, as much as you can or cannot speak of, which I recognize, when you are the top person at a place like Amazon in safety, you're going to have things you can't speak of. But from a just practical perspective, when you have, millions of employees, hundreds of thousands of different moving parts, different states, different countries, different regulatory needs, what was like your framework that you would use to try and judge large to small as for problem solving? I struggle with it. We're a tiny little company in the grand scheme of things. And I can only imagine with over 9,000 employees and millions of safety employees and millions of other employees. So what was your barometer of, priority of need?
Well, I would say a couple of things. One, some of that went out the window when we got to COVID, because I found myself getting much more in the weeds, especially in the early days of that, because there was so much that we were trying to understand and put in place. And it really required daily meetings of lots of different teams. But more generally, I would say it's really important how you set up your organizational structure, both within the health and safety team, but then also how that team interacts with the other partners that are really critical to the success of health and safety performance. So I often talk about there needs to be a four-legged stool. I think really it's probably more than four legs. But, if you think about your core partners in terms of finance and HR and operations, and safety really needs to have that same influence in terms of partnering with those different teams. But there's really more. I mean, there's also legal and procurement and HR and engineering and automation. So how do you set up the teams to really drive those partnerships and the decision-making within those partnerships? And so then you need to look at the strategic planning that goes into creating those partnerships and the goals that need to be owned across the organization, and make sure that they're just not owned by safety. And then the cadences, what are the metrics to measure performance on those goals? And how do we, meet, is it weekly? Is it monthly? What does that look like? And how do you reach decisions within that framework? So at Amazon, it was already kind of set up for me. They're very much what's called a white paper.
Right. I know it well.
Decision making.
Yes.
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 Okay. And so you don't get these big PowerPoints. You're limited to 6 pages of what this white paper is. And oftentimes there can be many extra pages in the appendix, but you're limited to 6 pages. And so there's like a lot of work that goes into getting it down to those 6 pages on some decisions that have a lot of information or data are very complicated. But at the meeting, it begins with the leaders reading that white paper in silence. Sometimes people won't even come on camera until the conclusion of that reading. And then the discussion takes place. And the discussion is really to, in some ways, critique the white paper, but essentially to reach a decision at the end of that meeting. And I think another really important thing is to think about the types of decisions, how thorough how the process needs to be for a decision. So there are some decisions that we would call two-way doors, where you make decisions quickly and you don't need all of the information. You probably actually never need all of the information, but you need less information for a two-way door decision, because you can, essentially it's two-way door because you can go back through the door if you realize it wasn't the right decision. It's easy to reverse that decision. If it's a one-way door decision, it's more important. You need more information because it's very difficult to unwind that decision. So I think it's important to think about that process and decision-making, and also to know when you can delegate. So that's why I say, like, during COVID, I think in the early days, I was working, as many other health and safety professionals, I was working as many hours as my eyelids would allow. But it was because, like, you needed to be involved in a lot more decisions, a lot more review of policies and standards. But hopefully that's not your normal process if you have a really large organization, that you don't need to be involved in every decision. Because there's only so many hours in a day. And if you're involved in every decision, it's going to slow you down from moving quickly.
It's funny you should say that. So my 2 takeaways from that last sentence. One, we actually went into revenue in January of 2020. So I opened the doors. We incorporated late 18, but realistically, we got ready to launch and we did all of our MVP stuff. But we went live just right when the pandemic hit. And for the first 18 to 24 months, we were not only figuring out what we were and how we operate just as a startup, but then we were a COVID company. Like we went from generalized occupational health and safety, and we went full into industrial hygiene. It's like, okay, everything that we're doing has to do sampling and has to have policies and procedures and support. We're going to be in Arizona only and open up different cities. And we said, well, everybody's at home, so we may as well just open up nationwide. So COVID completely changed my in the weeds mentality as well, not nearly at the scale of yours. But I'll tell you what, I didn't actually get on my business plan until 22. Like, we didn't get and start executing our actual job until 22. And so it was a very unusual time. I mean, we were doing reopening of schools and reopening of churches and support of the employees that, well, I am just mistaken on all of my language today, but all the employees that were going to work that couldn't stay home, that, they needed to have support. And the good news is everybody embraced our model because it was virtual. You could have a third party come out and do it, and you weren't exposing your safety professionals or other people on your team to risk. Now you're exposing the Elbert professionals to risk, so there's a whole other conversation to that. But the other piece is that what you said was when to delegate and when to own things. And we have, in this industry, are control freaks. So one thing I know more than anything else is that if there's a survey that can be done by one of my people, or a training or an assessment or a review, they will do it every time, unquestionably. And you have to have the conversation about efficiency of your time and your, what is your best use of time? What can you delegate to a great third party? Did you have a lot of third party? I mean, you had 8,500 people, but you also had such a large operation. Did you have to deal with people Yelber didn't exist for us per se, but third party consultants, the 5 to 50 person small consulting firms, we got close to 7,000 people, so we might have been able to support you if we were around at the time. But did you deal with a lot of that, or was it kind of built here, if you can use our people? How did you feel about it? What was your thought process there?
Yeah, I don't want to lean too heavily into COVID, but that was a time where we definitely used third parties more. And there were especially experts when it came to COVID and the pandemic. We've leaned on those a lot. Like we surrounded ourselves with people who knew the latest and were, experts in that space. But, even so, even beyond that, you're always going to have, when you have a really large organization, you're always going to have a lot of contractors. And how do you manage that? I guess I would say one thing Amazon's really good at is building its own. So when I was at Amazon during the pandemic, I think we were the only employer that built its own FDA-approved lab for testing, for COVID sample testing. And so employees had the ability to get tested on site most of the time at their own work site, and have that test shipped to a testing facility where it was processed. And we didn't want to take away supply from the local communities at a time where getting those tests was challenging. So Amazon built it. Amazon is really great at that. Like when I was there, we built our own EHS information management system. We'd previously used one off of the shelf and just decided that we could build our own that was more specific to our operations and needs.
So interesting. It's so cool, by the way. I'm a huge, huge fan of Amazon. I do know the downsides, and I've had many discussions around, a company that does so many things and all that good stuff. But that's the type of innovation and moving fast and being very focused on the right solution that you need at that given moment. Thank you for answering that as honestly and openly as you did. So, because we're going to be running out of time, I want to make sure that we cover what you're doing now. So, besides enjoying sunny Florida and being a great mom, and what are you doing like with your time now? And people wanted to, reach out to you for what you're doing. Are you, are you marketing anything specifically? You're writing a book? Are you speaking? Are you going to hopefully, be an evangelist for Yellowbird everywhere you go? Unlikely, but, What are you doing? Yeah, what are you doing? Yeah, tell us about what you're doing now.
Well, I really try to bring all of the different experiences I've had together. So I am still a lawyer. I can help companies with their compliance, defending, doing inspections, defending citations if they should get some. But I really love to help companies continually improve. So that is some of the work I would say leans more into my time at Amazon. And I think that experience was just so valuable that I can help other companies on their journey. So that's some work that I really love to do. And sometimes it's looking at other companies' organizational structure and assessing, have they set it up in the best way to achieve their strategic goals, and then helping them with their strategy, helping them evaluate technology, how to use leading indicators, data, in some more innovative ways. So I would say that's some of the work that I really love to do. I'm also passionate just about helping health and safety professionals. I love to be engaged with ASSP. I still really follow the work of the National Safety Council, and in particular the MSD Solutions Lab, which I am very proud of in terms of my role in helping found that. So just how do we move beyond compliance? And I actually wrote a blog post not too long ago thinking about OSHA in this administration and how OSHA should be thinking about reinventing itself, being more relevant. And what does that look like? Because I think, now having worn the hats of both a lawyer and a health and safety professional, I think oftentimes we focus too much as lawyers on the compliance side and not enough on the moving beyond that, which, leans more into the work of a health and safety professional. So how do you bring those together, especially for an agency like OSHA? And I know that it is so challenging to get a rule, a standard promulgated. It literally takes, I think, on average, 7 years for one. And it's just not an efficient use of OSHA resources. And it's oftentimes not the main conversation of organizations. They're focusing on how do we improve operational excellence and how is safety a part of that? So they're not so focused on compliance because that's really the floor for them. They want to move so far beyond that. And so how can agencies like OSHA be more a part of that conversation? Again, going back to how do you get all of the stakeholders around the table to drive the best decisions to help companies that need improvement? And frankly, every company is on that journey of continual improvement. So how could an agency like OSHA be more engaged in that conversation? And I think that looks like more partnerships. There's been some really great examples within OSHA and outside OSHA, like of doing that between industry and stakeholders and those kind of partnerships. And just again, how do we look at things beyond TRIR? Again, looking at other consensus standards or leading metrics. And I would love to see OSHA be more engaged in that conversation.
It's funny. Thank you for that. That was really, you're very articulate in how you describe these things. So I'm in awe of how you just stated that. I live in a very similar world as you do, and I'm always trying to find the 97% of the things that my customers are doing great. I want a Yellowbird report to come out with, you guys are crushing it. You're doing a wonderful job on these 97% of things. And in particular, we noted that you are doing a great job with, safety data sheet management or tier 2, or you're doing a great job with your NFPA fire assessments, or there's so many things you can point out. And the 3%, here are the things that we would recommend, and here are some ways you can do it. And it just feels that the punitive aspect, the safety cop, the all the disregard for all the good, and just focusing on the areas of improvement or areas of non-compliance is such a disservice. And if you think about it from a schooling perspective, any authority that tells you, you're doing a horrible job on this test. Well, in our world, in many cases, people are literally they are B+ students, and the teacher's flogging them because they aren't an A+ student. But you didn't focus on all the other things that are being done well. I think some of the things that we're doing in a public-private partnership at some point would be very interesting to discuss with OSHA, just because we are looking at human beings that are doing this kind of work, because humans are still the main tool in this tool chest. And so it's interesting. I'm so thankful that you are an advocate for this. And we work with all the same groups you mentioned, and we love the BCSP and ASSP and NSC and all these folks. They're our friends. Our pros come from there. And, it's funny, our pros are also many times they're at companies. Like they'll come and take a day off, and they'll review policies, or they'll do a training. It's actually quite interesting because everybody's like, oh, you're either supply chain or you're the demand. It's like in our world, we're kind of both. 1 second somebody is doing a walkthrough at a location on a Saturday morning, doing a hazardous materials assessment for, chemical management. And on Monday, they're running a warehouse as a safety supervisor or a safety senior executive. It's just such a fascinating. The lines are
I love that.
Yeah, they're getting gray. And not in a bad gray way, but still getting gray.
And I think that's one of the great things about our professionals, health and safety professionals. We love to solve problems, and there is a lot of coordination across industries, across different groups, and the work that we can do together is much more effective, because there really is no silver bullet. There's not going to be one thing. It's not just compliance. It's not just human organizational performance. There's a lot of things that go into reducing risk and eliminating incidents. So the more that we can all come together and talk about these things, and how do we move beyond sort of the old traditional framework of being the safety police or blaming a worker when something goes wrong, and thinking about how we eliminate the risk and how we understand human performance. That's the kind of thing that I would say I'd love to do now. I'm still a lawyer,
People need help from a legal perspective. That's when they would reach out to you, or do you do consultative work with organizations in a non-lawyer capacity? What is your preference for how people reach out to you?
I wouldn't say I have a preference. I love them both. I love a variety. I love a challenge, and I don't like to get bored. So to be able to go into any one of those silos is fun for me. I also really enjoy sort of the DC world still of working with organizations, doing comments. I represented one organization on their comments on the heat rule, and they testified recently on the hearing that OSHA is having on the proposed heat and illness prevention rule.
That's fantastic. And just as a note, if I can ever be helpful in any of those things personally, I'm happy to do it. So please just keep me in mind for that kind of thing. And also, I, at some point, and not on this call because we're going long and I'm going to let you have your day back, but I find that one of the challenges is that rules tend to be structured and, as they need to be, but the human aspects of some of the jobs is so challenging. A forklift driver turns over every 90 days in many, many circumstances for many, many different reasons. And so you have to be OSHA certified as meeting OSHA safety standards, not certified because it's not actually a certification, but you need to meet OSHA standards for driving a forklift once a year. And that's great if you hired all your people at the exact same time and they stayed for 12 months. But the staggering of just the reality of operations, it feels as though there's some real areas of opportunity to improve practical, solutioning around these things. So at some point, you and I are going to have a huge talk. Another huge talk, and maybe if you'd be willing, you and I can sit down and come up with ways that we can be helpful, just to improve the community, because that's all I want.
And you mentioned I love technology and how we look at using technology to help solve some of these persistent safety issues, like safety around forklifts. And I serve as a board advisor to one company that uses AI and IoT for a variety of safety solutions, but all of their solutions are safety solutions. And the one that they're probably most known for is what they do with forklifts. So there's just a lot of exciting work going on, and I'd love to be engaged in those conversations.
Love it. Well, if I can be helpful for you or them, at some point, we all seem to be pointing out areas of risk, but we're not finding solutions. We're the solution in that journey, but I'm not going to pitch Yelbert. I'm going to thank you. I would love for you to tell people. I would love for you to tell people best place to reach you, and if it's wherever you want them to reach out to you, and then we will wrap up.
Well, I would say either go to my website, MacDougallSolutions.com, or check me out on LinkedIn. I have a newsletter that you can subscribe to there.
Fantastic. Now, I am going to post both the blog that you referenced, a link to your LinkedIn as well as your website, and that will all be part of this podcast. And thank you so much, Heather. I know how busy your time is, and I appreciate you spending it with us. So have a wonderful day.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Take care. That's it for today's episode of the Canary Report. If this conversation helped you reframe how you think about risk and safety, please do me a favor. Hit subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who needs to hear it. We're building a new category of safety and risk leadership, one that's faster and smarter. Leaders who aren't just empowered by tech, but whose wisdom is accelerated by it. To learn more about how Yellowbird's cutting-edge platform is empowering leaders to solve workplace safety and risk challenges faster, smarter, and at scale, visit goyellowbird.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Yellowbird pages to stay up to date. Until next time, lead with clarity, know first, and act fast.